Gopijana Palapa Girivaradari Yasodanandana Pratajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Palapa Girivaradari Yasodanandana Pratajana Ranjana Yamunatira Panachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Palapa Girivaradari Yasodanandana Pratajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai. Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai. Gonitai ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 56, and the text is 4 and 5, and the chapter is entitled the Shamantaka Jewel. So text 4. Satam Bibran Manim Kante Brijamano Yataravihi Pravishto Dvarakam Rajan Tejasa no Palaksitaha Satam Bibran Manim Kante Brirajamano Yataravihi Pravishto Dvarakam Rajan Tejasa no Palaksitaha Satam Bibran Manim Kante Rajamano Yataravihi Pravishto Dvarakam Rajan Tejasa no Palaksitaha Satam Bibran Manim Kante Rajamano Yataravihi Pravishto Dvarakam Rajan Tejasa no Palaksitaha. The word for word, Sa, he, King Satyajit. Tam, that. Bibrat, wearing. Manim, jewel. Kante, on his neck. Rajamanaha, shining brilliantly. Yata, like. Ravihi, the sun. Pravishta, having entered. Dvarakam, the city of Dvaraka. Rajan, King Parikshit. Tejasa, because of the effulgence. Na, not. Upalak Sutaha, recognized. And the translation for text 4 is as follows. Wearing the jewel on his neck, Satyajit entered Dvarka. He shone as brightly as the sun itself, O king, and thus he went unrecognized because of the jewel's effulgence. And text 5. Tam vilokya janaturat tejasa mushta drishtaya divyate kshar bhagavate sasam suhu surya sankitaha. And the translation for text 5 is as follows. As the people looked at Satyajit from a distance, his brilliance blinded them. They presumed he was the sun god Surya and went to tell Lord Krishna, who was at that time playing at dice. Om Gyanatimidandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dudati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shah Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakha Vitamsha E Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpataribhya Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimad Prabhupada Swami Tinamine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Tinamine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Paschachati Shatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I'll just reread the translation for text 4. Wearing the jewel on his neck, Satyajit entered Dwarka. He shone as brightly as the sun itself, O king, and thus he went unrecognized because of the jewel's effulgence. So these texts don't have a BBT commentary, but there is a one-line commentary from Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur for text 4, the one I've just read. And that one-line commentary is as follows, quoting, "The citizens do not recognize," and the word that was used is no palaksitaha. The citizens did not recognize Satyajit. They mistook him for the sun god. Close quote. So, this particular little section, these two texts that we're covering today, this moment, is covered by Srila Prabhupada in Krishna book, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, where he writes, says Srila Prabhupada writing, when Satyajit wore his jewel in a locket around his neck, he appeared exactly like an imitation sun god. So, yeah, the usage of the word imitation is very interesting. And it brings to mind that there are times when we don't have the facts in front of us, but we nevertheless feel fairly sure we're right in what we say. And at other times, we may say things that are incorrect because we've been guilty of assuming something for which there's no evidence. So there's some facts about the sun god, just looking at that, because that's one of the errors one can make. One doesn't have all the facts, but one feels confident to say something. So if we look at some of the facts about the sun god, so this is Lord Krishna, and he says, and this is from Bhagavad Gita 4.1, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivaswan, and Vivaswan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. Thus, the sun god, as the king of the sun planet, had the Bhagavad Gita delivered to him at a time when it was in fact being delivered to the royal order of all the planets. The reason this was so, meaning the delivery of the Bhagavad Gita, was that the kings, having the duty to protect all the inhabitants in their particular planets that they were ruling, would understand Bhagavad Gita and so would rule the citizens, protecting them from bondage to material life. Now, as per Srila Prabhupada, he makes a generalization, and this is a generalization Srila Prabhupada makes, quoting him. The executive heads of all states and planets are obliged to impart this lesson, meaning the cultivation of spiritual knowledge in eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of God. So there's an obligation on the part of the rulers. So here, meaning this transfer of knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, such lessons are transferred by disciplic succession. So that is what the quote was that I'd read, where there's a connection with the sun god from Bhagavad Gita 4.1, one of the facts about him. There's the transference by disciplic succession with the sun god, this particular lesson, that one needs to make a connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, where there's a transferal of spiritual knowledge to his son Manu, and from Manu to Maharaj Ikshvaku. And the Manu that's referred to in Bhagavad Gita, in this particular quote of that I've quoted of Lord Krishna, is the seventh Manu of the 14 Manus in one day of Lord Brahma. So this this Manu, the seventh Manu, is one of the Prajapatis, meaning those who have to create progeny. They were entrusted to do that by Lord Brahma. And here, he's the son of the sun god, Vivashwan. So this is a fact that, one needs to, in considering something, one needs to start taking into account all these facts. So I'm going through some of the facts about the sun god. Because here we're hearing that the citizens are seeing someone and they don't have all the facts, but they're thinking it must be the sun god. So going back to the factual part about the sun god, the transmission of devotional service was actually being done for the welfare of the whole of human society, and it was the sun god who was receiving this knowledge from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself, as were the other kings of the planets at that particular time. So another fact in relation to the sun god is that Maharaj Yudhisthira, and this is quoting, performed his daily morning duties by praying, offering fire sacrifice to the sun god, and offering obeisances, grains, cows, land, and gold to the Brahmanas. He then entered the palace to pay respects to the elderly. So this is from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.13.31. So the sun god is the recipient of the sacrificial or the sacrifices that are part of the pious duties of householders, because Maharaj Yudhisthira was functioning as a householder, and part of those pious duties of a householder are to rise early and after bathing to offer respects to the deity in their homes by prayers, and also by offering fuel to the sacred fire. So I'm not quite sure if that means that somebody in the position of Maharaj Yudhisthira is obviously in the royal lineage. He was actually conducting a fire sacrifice in the morning. But at any rate, it's the duty of a householder to perform a sacrifice by worship of the deities and by giving Brahmanas charity. So somebody in the royal order is doing that on a public level. And particularly the mention of the sun god is that adding fuel to the sacrificial fire is worshipping the sun god. So a daily worship is made to the sun god by householders, and particularly those in the royal lineage, although of course it is the duty of all householders to actually follow the same sequence of rising early, paying respects to the deity, offering items of worship, and also giving charity to the Brahmins. So a third fact related to the sun god is that of the relation between the sun god and Lord Krishna. So this is expressed by Lord Brahma, and he puts it this way: let me worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead Govinda Krishna, who is the original person and under whose order the sun, which is the king of all planets, is assuming immense power and heat. The sun represents the eye of the Lord and traverses its orbit in obedience to his order. So that was Yakchakshur, Esha Savita, Sakala Grahanam, Raja Samasta, Sura Murtir Adesha Tejaha, Yasyagnaya, Brahmati, Sambrita, Kala, Chakro, Govindam, Adipurusham, Tamaham, Bhajami. So that was Brahma Samhita 532. So the facts, so this is an interesting fact, of course, that that connection between the sun and the Supreme Lord is actually considered to be the eye of the Supreme Lord on the universal level. And the fact that it's traversing its particular orbit, again, it's in obedience to the order of Lord Krishna. So that is Lord Brahma recognizing that fact. So all these facts, so some of them that I've touched on, just to put into perspective who the sun god is, his relationship with Lord Krishna, the respectful worship that's offered to him on a daily basis by those in the royal lineage through fire sacrifice or adding fuel to fire, and also his particular importance in the sense of receiving the knowledge, transcendental knowledge in the form of Bhagavad Gita directly from Lord Krishna. So these are pretty important facts to take into account. And when Satyajit was in front of the people, they felt fairly right in what they were saying. So remember, one of the problems one can run into is that one says something without having all the facts, but feels one is fairly right. So what they felt fairly right about was saying, this is the sun god. And that's quoting, as the people looked at Satyajit from a distance, his brilliance blinded them. So that's what they were going on. They felt they were fairly right because he was so brilliant that it must be the sun god, just by virtue of the fact that he appeared so brilliant. So they're presuming he was the sun god, Surya. And they went to tell Krishna, who was at that time playing at dice. So that's what we heard from text 5. So they don't have the facts in front of them. And the assumption is based on the brilliance that's coming from the jewel that Satyajit is wearing. And in fact, the jewel's effulgence that had Satyajit actually had him remain unrecognizable. So one couldn't even properly distinguish his features because the jewel was, the brilliance emanating from the jewel was the prominent feature. And Srila Prabhupada states it this way, quoting Srila Prabhupada, the sun is the king of the planets, and the sun god, at present of the name Vivashvan, rules the sun planet, which is controlling all other planets by supplying heat and light. He is rotating under the order of Krishna, and Lord Krishna originally made Vivashvan his first disciple to understand the science of Bhagavad Gita. So sort of everything I've recounted in terms of Lord Brahma's statements it's emerging in Srila Prabhupada's writing in the same way. The very extraordinary position that the sun god occupies, and particularly his name at the present time is Vivashwan, and he's controlling all the other planets just by virtue of the fact that he's supplying heat and light, which everyone is dependent on in every single planet. And again, Srila Prabhupada is drawing attention to the fact that the rotation of the sun, the planet that he's ruling, is rotating in that manner under the order of Lord Krishna. And again, that very significant fact, he's the first disciple of Lord Krishna to receive the knowledge of Bhagavad Gita. Now, going a little bit further, the word imitation, because that was the word used by Srila Prabhupada writing in Krishna book, that, what's the sentence again? When Satyajit wore this jewel in a locket around his neck, he appeared exactly like an imitation sun god. So the word imitation is used by Srila Prabhupada in another context. And so this is part of his writings, and he used it in this way. I'm going to read how he's writing about imitation, just to understand his usage of the word. So this is Srila Prabhupada. So it's not in relation to to Satyajit, but just on the topic of imitation. Srila Prabhupada writes, "You have met with some imitation coin. That does not mean that there is no real coin. You are unfortunate you met with an imitation coin. So don't make the calculation. There is no real coin. All coins are imitation. This is nonsense. There is imitation coin and there is real coin. It is up to you to find out which is real and which is imitation." So just on the usage of the word imitation, Srila Prabhupada is drawing attention to the fact that, again, this problem of assumptions one can make. One can assume if one sees a fake coin that now all coins must be fake. But he's pointing to the fact, no, if there's a fake coin, there must also be a real coin. So the point is, you have to carefully discern which is the imitation coin and which is the real coin. So he said this actually in relation to there be no guru. So it was on the topic of gurus. But I'm just drawing attention to his elaborating what the word imitation is, because he's using that in relation to Satyajit appearing to be being an imitation sun god. So of course one could infer just from Srila Prabhupada's usage of the word imitation that one has to draw a distinction between the imitation sun god and the real sun god. So I've tried to draw attention to something of the facts of the real sun god. So continuing Srila Prabhupada's narration from Krishna book. So this is Srila Prabhupada writing. Putting on this jewel, he entered the city of Dwarka, and people thought the sun god had come into the city to see Krishna. They knew that Krishna, being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, was sometimes visited by the demigods. So while Satyajit was visiting the city of Dwarka, all the inhabitants except Krishna took him to be the sun god himself. Although King Satyajit was known to everyone, he could not be recognized because of the dazzling effulgence of the Shamantaka jewel. So you can see the problem here. The fact that, in the memory bank of everyone, there's the known fact that the demigods do visit Lord Krishna. So they're working already on that. Oh, dazzling, must be a demigod visiting, must be a Surya Dev. And they're also working on a very visible fact, and that is that this personality that's approaching is dazzling. So they connect the two. Oh, demigods do visit Lord Krishna. This personality is very dazzling, must be the sun god. The sun god has come to visit Lord Krishna. So that's one of the problems that can happen. One can actually not have things dead clear, but just think one is fairly right. So just Srila Prabhupada's nice explanation points to how the thought process is of the people. Mistaking Satyajit to be the sun god, some of the important citizens of Dwarka immediately went to Krishna to inform him that the sun god had arrived to see him. At that time, Krishna was playing dice. So that's Srila Prabhupada writing. Now, in Srimad Bhagavatam 127, there's this statement. Because all the citizens, they immediately think, okay, if this demigod has arrived, they have to report it to Lord Krishna to announce the arrival of the demigod. So it brings to mind that they're rendering some service to Lord Krishna. So there's this statement, and it's made by the residents of Dwarka on this topic of rendering service to Lord Krishna. By rendering devotional service unto the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna, one immediately acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So they're approaching Krishna, they're going to render some service. That service is to inform him that the demigod Surya Dev has arrived. And they also, if one makes this connection, when they go to perform the service, any service performed to Lord Krishna brings about causeless knowledge. So we're going to come to hear how they get exposed to some further knowledge when they do come to Lord Krishna. That will be covered in the next class or two. But at any rate, this is the citizens of Dwarka talking about what the effect is of performing devotional service. One acquires causeless knowledge and detachment from the world. So commenting, Srila Prabhupada states, and this is Srila Prabhupada commenting on this understanding of performing service to Lord Krishna. It is said that the Bhakti cult is meant for the Sudras, the Vaishyas, and the less intelligent woman class. But this is not the actual fact. The Bhakti cult is the topmost of all transcendental activities, and therefore it is simultaneously sublime and easy. It is sublime for the pure devotees who are serious about getting in contact with the Supreme Lord, and it is easy for the neophyte who are just on the threshold of the cult of bhakti to achieve contact with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is a great science, and it is open for all living beings, including, it says, brought it right around, including the Sudras, the Vaishyas, and even those lower than the low-born Sudras. So what to speak of the high-class men like the qualified Brahmanas and the great self-realized kings. The other high-grade activities, so, I've just brought up the, what we just reading in this verse, that these citizens are about to perform some devotional service, and then I'm just touching on some of the misconception that exists that Srila Prabhupada writes about in relation to making this connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that it's really just meant for, Sudras or Vaishyas or being particularly derogatory. to, I guess, persons of a female gender, but that in actual fact, it's open to everyone. Now, Srila Prabhupada is calling the Bhakti cult a very high-grade activity, and there are other high-grade activities, and those are designated as sacrifice, charity, and austerity. So these are very high-grade activities. So generally, one may consider just working hard or doing one's duty as a very high-grade activity, but in actual fact, the real high-grade activities are making sacrifices, giving charity, performing austerities, and of course, engaging in the bhakti cult. Because these particular sacrifice, charity, and austerity, they are all corollary factors. They follow the pure and scientific bhakti cult. So, now, the citizens of Dwarka, they make a generalization themselves. And this is them. O Lord, you are worshipped by all demigods, like Brahma, the four, oh, my computer changed something, sorry, and even the King of Heaven. You are the ultimate rest for those who are really aspiring to achieve the highest benefit of life. You are the supreme transcendental Lord, and inevitable time cannot exert its influence upon you. So they have a very good understanding, again, of the relationship between the demigods and Lord Krishna. He worshipped by all the demigods, and they give examples like Lord Brahma, Lord Indra, and yeah, and they're Krishna's ultimate rest for anybody aspiring to achieve the highest benefit of life. So this comes from Srimad Bhagavatam 1.11.7. So these are understandings that the citizens of Dwarka have about Lord Krishna. And once again, there's Srila Prabhupada's comment. And he puts it this way. The Supreme Lord is Krishna, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, Sri Brahma Samhita, and other authorized Vedic literatures. No one is equal to or greater than him, and that is the verdict of all scriptures. The influence of time and space is exerted upon the dependent living entities who are all part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. The living entities are predominated Brahman, whereas the Supreme Lord is the predominating Absolute. As soon as we forget this fact, we are at once in illusion, and thus we are put into threefold miseries, as one is put into dense darkness. The clear consciousness of the cognizant living being is God consciousness, in which one bows down unto him in all circumstances. And I'm reading this particular comment of Srila Prabhupada, which follows on the understanding that I've read from the Srimad Bhagavatam that comes of the citizens of Dwarka in relation to the Supreme Lord, because it's got implication for what's coming up. So the two texts we're reading today are not touching on what's coming up yet, but I'm reading this because there's going to be very much an implication if somebody such as Satyajit forgets the fact that there's one is a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and that one is a predominated spiritual entity, and that the Supreme Lord is the predominating Absolute, as Srila Prabhupada puts it. Because when one forgets that simple fact, one comes into illusion, and we're going to see how Satyajit is approached by the Supreme Lord as to what his behavior should be, and how he responds, forgetting this particular relationship that he as a living entity or as part and parcel of the Supreme Lord has to the Supreme Lord, and he falls into illusion. So there are examples of facts which are before one, and what one can assume to be true. And that is that no one should neglect the order of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or the order of the spiritual master. So this is a very relevant fact, and uh, one should act unhesitatingly to execute the order of the Lord, for that will keep one safe in all circumstances. So these are implications just from understanding the position of Krishna, that there's that necessity to execute his order because it keeps one safe in all circumstances. And the reason for this is that no one can ascertain his destiny as the Supreme Lord can, and therefore the best course of action to take is direction from the Supreme Lord. So these salient facts, they're going to become very prominent through the action of Satyajit, who chooses to not execute the order of the Lord. So that's coming up. So this was an attempt to look at the citizens of Dwarka and their seeing Satyajit and responding, not having all the facts in place, but feeling pretty confident that he's the sun god. And so I tried to examine that in more detail. So if there's any comments, thoughts, queries.
Hare Krishna Mata, thank you so much for the class. One point, if you can repeat again, then I can have a follow up. Krishna is predominantly absolute. What was the statement?
Oh, yes. The statement from how Srila Prabhupada explained it. Um, The living entities are predominated Brahman, whereas the Supreme Lord is the predominating Absolute. So the idea is that one is a spiritual entity, so Brahman, but the Supreme Lord is the predominating Absolute. So uh, he's overseeing the lives of the spirit souls, the dominated or spiritual entities. So he's the predominating absolute. Absolute, he's in a perfect position of understanding all knowledge, all clarity about the lives of all the spiritual beings. So they predominated, and he's on the absolute platform that he completely understands all of their lives.
He's on absolute platform.
Yes, yes. It means that uh, it's not good or bad, or there's not on the dual platform. It's on the absolute platform. It means that everything is perfect and complete and correct. There's no fault of any kind.
The reason I ask this, because I recently heard yesterday that to follow a genuine spiritual path, if we are practicing in community, there are 4 absolutes that are needed, and it mentioned. I was trying to understand if it was related to this, but they said that the 4 absolutes needed is absolute honesty, with other community members, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and act of absolute love. So I think whenever we use the word absolute, it's attributed to the highest extent, and it's godly in nature.
Yes, that's right. It means that one's free of defects. One's on the transcendentally pure platform of being completely connected, perfectly connected to the supreme absolute truth. So, therefore, one is acting completely in sync with his wishes and his orders and his direction. So, that kind of perfect communion, um, of being so perfectly synchronized with the supreme absolute truth means that one will have perfect honesty, perfect purity. I don't know what the other two were.
Unselfishness and love.
Perfect love, yes, and of course unselfishness naturally. Um, so that obviously is uh, just the usage of the word absolute implies that one is completely freed from being on a material plane where there's that duality, where sometimes selfish, sometimes unselfish, sometimes honest, sometimes a little dishonest. There's that duality going on. So one has transcended the material duality and is on an absolute level, and that or absolute plane of reality, transcendental plane of reality, and that's only possible with that communion or uh, perfect synchronization with the wishes and desires of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So even if one is not on that level, the idea is to get indication of what it is that the Supreme Lord is ordering. And that is obviously obtained through referring to those who are on the absolute platform, who are beyond material duality, because then you get the via medium. So generally the spiritual master is in that position. He's representing Krishna's order. So the spiritual master's order is perfectly synchronized with Lord Krishna's order.
Yes. Thank you so much for enhancing my understanding. I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for bringing up what you've been reading and considering.
Just to add to your answer on this question, the example that Prabhupada gave, that when you become an apprentice of an expert electrician, so the expert electrician knows all the details, all the things, everything about the subject matter, and the apprentice doesn't know. But if the apprentice follows the instructions that are given by the expert, even though you may not know what is this blue cable, what is this red cable, what is this white one, but if you say, if you follow, you attach this one to this one to that one, then the result comes. So in our situation, we may not be in the position of transcendence. We still may be influenced by the dualities of this material world. But if we follow the guidelines and the instructions that are given by those perfected beings, then we should be able to fulfill those, those requirements, because we're acting on, by following someone who are, who is transcendental, then you're able to be in that platform. So the whole thing for people like most of us is to really um, understand and follow as close as we can the instructions that have been given by the acharyas. And specifically for us is Srila Prabhupada's, as the preeminent acharya in our ISKCON society. So Prabhupada has given so much instructions of what to do and what not to do. And even on the things that sometimes Prabhupada may say things that appears to be contradictory at times, then you have to rely on advanced devotees, spiritual master. And you yourself can educate yourself. There's this whole thing called hermeneutics, which help us understand, the big picture of Prabhupada's instructions in the whole spectrum. But the principle for us is to follow Prabhupada's instructions. And if we do that, there's instructions of Srila Prabhupada how to manage. So, so if we follow Prabhupada's instruction on how to manage, then you can be thoroughly honest with the devotees, you can be selfless. You can do all the things. So we have to become educated with Srila Prabhupada's instructions. That's the catch.
Well, thank you. I feel reinforced for having taken a good chunk of this class quoting Srila Prabhupada on both the Bhakti cult and also the part of actually worshipping the Supreme Lord and recognize him as what Vibhu's question led to was, this idea that he's the predominating absolute. I mean, it's put very simply. If we forget the fact that we are at once in illusion, and thus we are put into threefold miseries as one is put into dense darkness. So it's very simply put. And, when one's practicing Krishna consciousness, these statements, they have a completely new meaning because you experience actually what Srila Prabhupada is saying. The minute you actually forget that connection with Krishna, indeed it's dense darkness. So there'll be a nice illustration of it coming up in the next verses. So thank you very much for your very kind attention and your thoughtfulness in looking at the matter. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.